Recording. Jeff Kahn, we are warmed up, man. We got so many exciting things to talk about, and one of my favorite subjects, and perhaps the most important health topic of them all, and that is sleep. So I look forward to just winding you up and getting some of these big picture objectives covered, seeing where this fascinating conversation will go. I'd love to hear how you got started when you were back in the college days and starting to wonder if sleep was affecting your performance as an engineering student, and then we'll take it and run from there.
Yeah, so I got into this about 10 years ago, and it's pleasure for me to tell this story and hopefully share a little bit of wisdom with everyone here, and bring a little bit of science to the table as too, Brad. I know we were talking a little bit about some of the mythology that's out there, but for me, it just started. I was just exhausted like everyone else was, and I think it's pretty normal for people to feel that way. But I thought, why not study sleep science? I just want to figure out, what do I need to do with my sleep so that I feel better? Do I need to take melatonin? Do I need to get my REM percentage up? My deep sleep? Do I need a new mattress? Do I need to bother with thermoregulation and getting a chili pad? Do I need to start tracking my sleep? Do I need to take just lay it on me? What do I need to do so that I feel good? And as I was reading through the literature base, honestly, I was just confused, and I had way more questions than answers. And so I begged my school sleep science department. I just said, please take me on as an apprentice. And so this is now 2011, 2012. The first consumer sleep trackers had just come on the market. And I was really interested in figuring out, how do you take that data that's being generated and use it to actually help people feel better and have better sleep habits? And so I ended up publishing that paper. And kind of before I knew it, all this was very academic until about 2014, 2015. All these pro athletic teams started calling in, asking Northwestern, hey, what are you doing with sleep? We saw this paper. We want to, we know sleep's important for performance. Can you help us? So very quickly started working with teams like Clemson and Alabama and Michigan and the Patriots and the Bulls and the Cowboys. Name a pro team, and we've worked with them. And
Why
it
did you
really
guys have
got
did you have a noted sleep laboratory, particularly at Northwestern, that's distinguished?
Yeah, so the believe it or not, the first sleep lab in the entire world opened at the University of Chicago, which is about, I don't know, 10 miles away, roughly 12 miles away from Northwestern, back in 1925.
Wow.
And so, sleep science has been around for almost 100 years, and it started in Chicago. That was the first human sleep lab. And so Northwestern, U Chicago, Penn, Stanford, Harvard, University of Washington, Pittsburgh, probably some of the biggest institutions in the world that study sleep. But there are now thousands of sleep scientists that have produced over the last almost 100 years, 3.5 million peer-reviewed papers. If you check on Google Scholar. So it's just wild, the amount of knowledge that's been generated. And just was lucky enough to get to study with some really, really great scientists, and
But it
fell in love
it
with
started, you're saying it started at Northwestern?
University of Chicago, so
Oh,
down the
okay.
road from Northwestern.
Yeah,
But it
that's so
started,
funny.
all there, yeah.
I have to throw
And
in an anecdote about my uncle because it's so close to home here. But he was a residency student at Northwestern doing his medical residency, and this would be in the
okay.
40s, the 1940s.
Wow.
And he described how he did not leave the building for about 6 weeks because of the heavy hours, and then sleeping in the classroom, and then getting back up and just cranking through residency with ungodly number of weekly hours. He never went outside. He didn't do anything. And so he finally got up the courage to ask his advisor, like, hey, is it possible that I could maybe take a weekend off at some point? And the guy said, oh, sure, go ahead, take the weekend off. So he left the building. He drove to Milwaukee, 90 miles, right, from Chicago. And he walked into his family home on whatever Friday afternoon or something, and he went down for sleep. And when he woke up, it was sometime on Sunday, where he had to get in the car and drive back to the building to return back to work. So he basically slept the entire weekend, and he had no idea because he was so deprived.
Wow.
And now we go back to Jeff's story of the sleep lab at Northwestern.
Yeah, no, that's it's kind of funny, because around that time is when some of the first studies were done on trying to figure out, what is this thing called sleep, and how do we measure it, and what does it all mean, and how does it affect how we function, and all that was coming to light right around that time. So in Chicago.
Yeah, the guinea
So
pigs were there. Yeah.
the guinea pigs were there. And where sort of my story took me is after years of working with these professional athletes and coaching them personally, and we building technology and all sorts of stuff in the field. I just decided, and if anyone's listening to this and is either run their own business or Brad, you've got your own podcast and doing a lot of stuff on your own. Doing anything is so hard. Doing anything well. And so I said, life is short. I really want to do something where we could take all these learnings from these pro athletes and apply it, to massive scale. Could we help anyone that has a mobile phone? And so that's sort of in 2018, just really had the great fortune to focus on building technology that anyone could use. And so today you can download our app in the App Store or Play Store. You just type in Rise and it'll pop up. And we help you with getting more energy using sleep and circadian rhythms as the main tools to do that. So, we can talk more about how we do that, but hopefully I can bring to bear some of the science that I learned back when I got started, a bunch of practical advice that I've gained over the years, but just happy to be as much of a resource as I possibly can.
Yeah, thanks. And you draw this distinction between sleep and circadian rhythm. So let's get into that, especially your contention that sleep solutions that are not centered around your circadian rhythm don't have as good of an impact.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, certainly on this show, and you've had a bunch of folks already talk about sleep. I think what is well documented, thanks to folks like Matt Walker and a ton of the, Ariana Huffington and all the major news outlets covering sleep, is that if you don't get good sleep, basically everything about your functioning suffers. You live less, your quality of life suffers, and is likely the most important lever that exists for how you function. So I think that's everyone is starting now to realize and is becoming known. What's not known, and maybe you disagree, Brad, or agree. I don't know
Well,
if you
it's
want
so
to chime in
funny.
there.
I think you caught me smiling there. And the funniest part is that when you're sleep deprived, you have poor judgment. And so everyone
Yes,
who walks around saying, yeah, I feel fine after 5 hours of sleep, I can just rally, but they're sleep deprived, so they have no idea how poorly functioning they are. It reminds me of those drunk
100%.
driving videos we watched in high school where the people had a couple drinks and they said, oh, I feel fine, I can go drive the cone course. And they're running all over the cones because
Oh
they had
yeah.
no idea how impaired they were. And so we had to watch on the video how impaired they were because they felt fine.
Well, and if you look at the research on that topic, you'll see that there's actually more, because of that phenomenon. There are more deaths every year because of fatigue driving as compared to drunk driving because of the same thing,
More than
right?
drunk driving.
Yeah, because you
Yeah.
get in the car, you had 5 hours sleep last night, and maybe you had six the night before, and maybe six the night before. It's been a rough couple days, but you feel fine. You get in the car and drive, and you nod off a little bit, and
Yeah.
it's in the early afternoon, and you run off the road, or you kill someone else, and it's serious stuff. And we can talk a little bit more about why that is, and why is it so hard to be aware of how sleep deprived you are, and what to do about it.
I guess I hate to do another detour. First was Uncle Jack, and now this Tiger Woods accident is so fascinating to me. I wrote a book about him long ago about his peak performance attributes and his focus and his ability to excel as an athlete. And there's some speculation that he's had problems with Ambien in his past. He's had a couple incidents on the road, and here's one where he took no evasive action. There's no skid marks, but he's awake and rushing to the golf course at 7:30 a.m. Maybe it was the sleep medication or something like that. If we want to just armchair here for a second.
Speculate. Yeah, I mean, it's when you look at most of the sort of high risk accidents, the Exxon Valdez, you look at
Yeah.
sort of Chernobyl, you look at a lot of these really big high risk accidents. Pretty much, I don't think there's one that doesn't have sleep deprivation as a sort of at least main or significant factor as part of the reason that the accident happened. And so I would be extremely surprised if Tiger Woods was incredibly well rested and had lows of sleep.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's a huge factor. So I think what people know is like it's a very important factor for how you feel and function. I think what's unknown today and what is misguided and what people don't really realize, not the scientific community realizes it quite clearly, but I think in the mass market, is that how do you get all those benefits? Like, what is it? Do you need to like increase your sleep quality? Do you need to get more sleep? Is it like, do you need to, what happens if you take melatonin? Do you need to change your REM sleep? Do you need to be tracking it? Like, what is actually going to affect how you function and how you feel? And so luckily for us, researchers have discovered what those factors are. And in my opinion, this is the most important finding in all of sleep science over the last 100 years. And it's called the two-factor model of sleep and wake regulation. So a lot of words, but basically all it means is if you care about how alert and awake you are during the day, there's two factors that matter. And so the first factor is something called sleep debt. And sleep debt simply is just a measure. It is truly a scientific term, but it just means that it's a measure of how sleep deprived you are on any given day. And the way that it works is we all have a genetic amount of sleep we need. So the average is slightly over 8 hours, so about 8 hours and 15 minutes with a 35-minute standard deviation.
Really?
So that means
That's
just like height or eye color, we have a genetic need.
That's referencing genetics.
Correct.
This standard deviation and this landing point of 815.
Yeah, so 815 is the average, but that would be like saying the average height for males in the US is 5'9", or I don't know what the actual average is. But
Yeah,
of course,
it is,
all of us are different than 5'9".
But it's that's a pretty tight standard deviation when you think about it.
Yeah, so most of us need between 7.5 and 9, roughly speaking.
How many?
Right, so plus or minus one standard deviation is roughly going to be about 65% of the distribution.
Oh, is that so? That's a scientific calculation. Sorry, I didn't pay attention in those classes. But so then we have 33% who are outside the one standard deviation. That's a lot of people.
Exactly.
And
it is.
So maybe there's 17% that need more than 845, and then there's 17 that can be the rock stars that we hear about.
100%. Yep. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. You're 100% right. And sort of as you need less and less, the likelihood that that's the case becomes less and less too. So, if you're like, oh, I need 5 hours, well, that's incredibly rare. That's like the number of people that are 7 feet tall, sort of thing. So,
yeah. Okay.
So,
all right.
So that's sort of the first thing that most people are like, really? Like, I didn't know my sleep need was genetic. I didn't know I had a different amount of sleep than someone else. I mean, I think we all kind of feel it, but it's bizarre to me that that's not just, everyone should know that. I mean, we spend so much time sleeping. We should all know that we have a genetic sleep need and it's different for each of us. And it does change significantly from the time you're born until you're at about until you go through adolescence. But once you hit about, you mature, age 18, let's say, through until you die, your sleep need from a biological standpoint doesn't appear to change. Although it's a bit of a contested point in the literature, it's still not quite known, but it seems to be the case that doesn't change so much. But your sleep architecture, what happens during sleep, certainly changes as your hormones change and as you age, and all sorts of things that we can get into later. So back to the story on sleep debt. If you don't meet this genetic need every night, you build up debt. And the simple way to think about it is sort of like bank debt, right? Like if you need, let's say you need 8 hours and you get 7 tonight. Well, then tomorrow you have 1 hour of sleep debt. And how you feel today, and then let's just play out this one more time. And then let's say that next day you need 8 because that hasn't changed, and you get 6. So now you add 2 more hours of sleep debt to the one you already had. So now you have 3 hours of sleep debt. So your performance, how you function, how you feel is going to be based on how much sleep debt you have, not based on how much you slept the night before, not based on your sleep quality, not based on how much REM you got, not based on your recovery scores, just how much sleep debt you have.
And you're saying this is a linear accumulation over time.
So it's not quite. So that's the simple understanding. The more accurate understanding is that it actually builds up over about 14 to 30 days. Our research with the NFL and NBA suggests that it's about 14 days is really where we can start to detect it in sort of real life performance settings, like 3-point percentage or point per minute efficiency or in-game performance if you're in the NFL. But there is some laboratory research that suggests that it can go as many as 30 days. And you can carry somewhere between 20 to 40 hours of this debt. So beyond some level, it's not like you can just keep accumulating it, ad infinitum, but you can, have somewhere between 20 to 40 hours. So the good news is if you've got a bunch of debt, you can pay it off, which is really exciting. But the sort of flip side to this is, let's say you have a bunch of debt. If you get, one night of 8 hours or even 2 nights of your need, don't expect to magically all of a sudden be much better because you haven't paid any debt back. And so it's really important to be thinking about how you're feeling with respect to how much sleep debt you have, over the last 2 weeks, not just what happened last night. Now, to your question about, is it a linear accumulation? It's not linear. So the last night does account for, just to give you an idea, if the last 14 days, there's 100% sort of weighting over the last 14 days, last night might be around 15% of the weighting. So last night's certainly the biggest chunk, but it's not the only chunk that matters. And it even goes back, again, as far as 40 days.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of my sister who's a physician. And so she has some call nights and some, huge disruptions to sleep. And she's a world champion on
Totally.
weekend napping. And she'll go in there for 2.5 or 3 hours and be crashed and report that she was totally crashed out. So obviously, making up on debt. In my case, I'm also a world champion napper, but my naps last routinely between 20 and the most ever would be 40 minutes or an hour. So I never get that much in debt, and therefore I don't need that world champion world class nap. But something
Yep.
clearly is going on here where this debt thing seems to make a lot of sense as one of the two most important. You're going to tell us number two, but
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually have the longest study in the history of sleep science that shows we're actually tracking the sleep debt
Starting
of all
with
these
Uncle
NFL and
Jack in
NBA athletes. Yeah.
1943 at Northwestern, driving. Yeah,
Exactly.
I hope he was driving safely to Milwaukee and back, but he was definitely in debt heading there the first time.
Exactly. He wasn't driving safely till Milwaukee, but on the way back, seemed like he paid back some debt and was doing better. So that sort of debt, and as I was just sort of saying on this study, we actually have a 2-year longitudinal study following NBA and NFL athletes, and we're
Wow.
actually looking at their sleep debt and how that predicts their in-game performance, their 3-point shooting, their point per minute efficiency. That just got accepted for publication about 3 weeks ago, so that should be coming out hot off the presses pretty soon.
And
but it's not surprising to the scientific community. But for everyone listening to this that is like, well, my sleep score says that I got okay sleep quality, and my this device said this, and that device said this, and my mattress company says I should be waking up feeling great in the morning. Just throw all that out the window and focus on sleep debt. It is the main number that matters and is the only sleep score that you should at all be concerned with. It's the only sleep score that is sort of based on science. Every other sleep score is, well, I don't know. We some engineers sat in a room and they said, well, we'll give this 15 points and that 20 points, and this, it's a game, it's entertainment, it's not actual science. And so just would encourage you to not look at those things and focus on what matters and think about your sleep debt. So that's,
oh my gosh, I'm so
factor
glad
number one.
that I'm so glad to hear that, because those things kind of freak me out, and I run screaming away from anything that can track my sleep, because I feel like when I'm trying to fall asleep at night, I'm going to be stressing about it or wondering what my score is, and it's going to get in my head instead of just go to sleep. And tracking debt seems to be so simple, Jeff, because when you hit the bed and when you wake up, and you just have an
Yeah.
hourly figure.
Exactly. And what's nice about that from a just sort of mental model is that sort of how much you need to pay back, how much in the hole you are. So if
Right,
you've got
right.
10 hours of sleep debt, you're like, oh, that's sort of I've lost an hour of sleep for 10 days, roughly. Just it gives you an idea of something you can think with. If your sleep score says you got 83%, what the heck does that mean? I don't know. And no one knows, and it's not important. It's not indicative of any underlying physiological process. And so when you look at sleep debt, what's actually kind of cool about it is it's very hard for us, as you mentioned, actually be aware of how much sleep debt we have. And what will routinely happen is if you measure someone's sleep debt. So if you're listening to this right now, and let's say you have a bunch of sleep debt, or you've been getting 6 hours of sleep a night, or 5 or 4, you'll be like, I might feel slightly sleepy during the day, but I'm not that tired. Like, I don't feel like I'm doing just fine. And researchers have looked at this and figured out, well, how is it that because here's the high level stat that might freak you out. If you go from 8 hours of sleep to 7 hours of sleep for a week, your cognitive performance is like you're at the legal limit for alcohol at the end of the week.
For missing 1 hour.
Missing 1 hour, so you build up 7 hours of sleep debt. You're at the legal limit for alcohol compared to having no hours of sleep debt.
Wow. In all ways, shapes, and forms throughout the day? Like
No,
everything I do
this
sucks,
is,
or?
so here's where it gets a little bit personal. There's sort of there's all, what quality of life means for you, what performance means to you is so different, right? You might really care about emotional performance. I might really care about my 40 time or my, reaction time or there's so many different types of performance. Roughly speaking, though, the way you can think about sleep debt is it is like oxygen. You cut it off and every single biological system we know of does deteriorate from a performance standpoint. So yes, you are right that roughly speaking, everything is worse off. What I'm referring to specifically with the cognitive performance is a measure called neurocognitive vigilance. And it's sort of a measure of how alert your brain is, how functioning it is, how performant it is. And it's measured through something called the PVT. It's basically a reaction time test that you can't learn. And that's, you would score, if you were to have zero sleep debt and take the test, or I'm sorry, if you were to have zero sleep debt and get drunk, so you're at the legal limit for alcohol, take the test, you'd score, let's say 250 milliseconds on average. And if you were to be fully sober, but have 7 hours of sleep debt, you'd also score 250 milliseconds.
Wow.
So that's sort of how the scoring on this test.
Yeah, and I guess the vast majority of us don't really have anything to hold us to the ultimate high standard during our day in, day out function. Like we were just talking before we hit record about the customer service person who I called up this morning. I said, "Hi, this is Brad Kearns. I want to talk about my account." And she said, "Can I have your name, please?"
Right.
So, most of us are kind of on cruise control unless we're shooting 3-pointers in the NBA, and then your debt shows up. And
even in the case of the phone agent. So if you build up about 8 hours of debt, your vocal tone, so how positive you perceive her voice will be more negative depending on how much sleep debt she has.
Wow.
So, it's how much empathy you have for her on the other end of the line is going to be based on how much sleep debt you have.
You could see how these things unwind. Yeah.
So like if you look at emotional performance, if you look at, cognitive performance, if you look at physiological performance, every single one of those is going to materially deteriorate in a clinical level as you build up sleep debt, and not crazy amounts of sleep debt either. So like actually Matt Walker did this study, who we've talked about a little bit before this, who I think has done some amazing things for the field, but his area of expertise is really sleep and memory. And he ended up doing a study that showed that if you build up about 8 hours of sleep debt, so you go imagine a night without sleep, 50% of people the next day will have clinical levels of anxiety for folks that otherwise weren't anxious. So, it's just, that's on the emotional side. And we can look at sort of the physiological side. Let's look at something like metabolism, which obviously you care a lot about. If you build up, this was done at UChicago back in 1999, and was sort of the foundational study for sleep and metabolism. And what it showed is if you take, 25-year-old healthy males and you have them get, I believe it's 4 hours a night of sleep for 5 nights.
I've heard this
might
study
be 5
referenced.
and 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've probably heard it before.
Yeah.
Where your glucose metabolism will be decreased by 30%, which is the rough equivalent to having type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
So, just shocking. Again, you build up sleep debt, and within a week or two, you could be experiencing clinical symptoms of physiological issues, emotional issues, cognitive issues, and the root cause, sleep debt.
Right. So when we talk about fat reduction, here's your goals with your diet. You're going to do keto. You're going to do this program. You're going to exercise like crazy. And if you're skimping on sleep, you're headed toward type 2 diabetes rather than any of your goals. It's shocking.
100%. Yeah. And any sort of goal that you could care about, sleep is really this foundational layer that allows you to do the other ones, that much better. So that's sleep debt. And I guess to close out the study on this, that if you have if you study folks that get 4 hours a night or 5 hours a night, and then asked to report how subjectively sleepy they feel the next day, what you'll see is that day one, let's say we're getting 8. Day one, you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm a little more sleepy. Day two, you'll feel a little more sleepy of getting, let's say, 4 hours at that second night. Then let's say you get 4 hours for a third night. We ask you, hey, how sleepy do you feel? You'll feel slightly sleepier. By that third day, by the way, you'll report to feeling slightly sleepy. And then basically from day 4 through day 14, you don't feel any more sleepy.
That's the defense mechanism you're referencing in our genetics?
That's I believe. If I now, this is an opinion I have. I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but if I had to venture an opinion, I would say that that's our sort of evolution's way of saying, hey, if you are not getting a lot of sleep because you're moving around to a new area, you're defending yourself, you're scrounging for that, you're really sleepy because you likely need to be on the run. And so we're going to activate all your fight or flight responses, right? We're going to increase
one of the
cortisol.
movies,
We're going to just get you going,
Yeah, like Harrison Ford in the movie, the Fugitive, or Tom Cruise on the run with his brother Rain Man, and boy. So I mean, that's great. I appreciate your opinion, but remember, you're referencing the science and then forming an opinion about it. So we have scientific proof that we don't feel any more sleepy.
Correct.
Even though we're sleep debt. So we're trying to make the best of it. Yeah, that's pretty trippy. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you look at that same group of people, we also measured their what's called their neurocognitive vigilance, the test I just referenced just a little bit ago. And if you measure that, or you measure their empathy, or you measure their metabolism, any of these outcome measures that you happen to care about, you'd see it linearly declines over time. So you are not a good judge of your own performance, like you said, with the high school drunk driving courses. So that's been well documented. And so what this means is that it's really freaking hard for all of us to be aware of how much sleep debt we're actually carrying. Many of us don't really know. And so the signal is, and I think the takeaway is, and there's a famous class at Stanford called Sleep and Dreams. It was taught by a guy named Bill Dement, who's known as sort of the grandfather of sleep science. He actually started his career at University of Chicago back in the 30s, then went over to Stanford to start the field of sleep medicine. But he taught a class to undergraduates at Stanford, and the tagline for the class, the entire thing, this guy is like one of the biggest people in the field. And the tagline for his class is drowsiness is red alert. So the idea being, if you are slightly sleepy and you feel at all drowsy, you have significant amount of sleep debt. What's exciting about that is you can then know that you have so much more potential ahead of you in terms of how you're going to feel, how you're going to interact with others, how you're going to perform, in an athletic context or non-athletic context. So that's what's really exciting about maybe even being drowsy, is knowing that you have this whole other frontier to continue to improve.
Are you talking about drowsy during the day or at a certain time when you shouldn't be drowsy?
Yeah. Are you drowsy during the day?
Yeah.
So if after waking up, do you notice that you're drowsy at any point during the day? If so, you have material amount of sleep debt that you can start paying down.
Okay. So sleep debt was number test. 1 in the 2-factor model of sleep. What's number 2?
So number 2 is something called the circadian rhythm, which you've also talked a little bit about. I think you've had at least one show on the topic. And I'll just simplify it down for everyone to really what the name circadian even means. So circa is around, is Latin for around. Dian is Latin for day. So it refers to the around a day, the around 24-hour physiological, biological processes that we go through. And so what's happening is we actually have a part in the brain called the SCN, and it's actually controlling at a cellular level. I don't know if you remember back to high school biology, ATP production. ATP is the sort of energy source for cellular functioning. Literally how much ATP your cells are producing at any given time during the day. And so as a result of that, we actually have times during the day where we should feel groggy, like in the morning. It actually takes about 90 minutes to fully wake up in the morning. You should not feel very good when you wake up. We can talk about that later. You have times during the day that are peak performance for you. So for example, you've got one peak in the morning and one in the early evening typically. Just quick spoiler here. most Olympic world records are broken in that second peak. It's the sort of best time if you're trying to break athletic records that you should be performing. And then you actually have a time at night that you should be sleeping biologically. It's when your brain is releasing the sleep hormone melatonin. And so most of us just don't even know these things are happening. And when you know those, what you can then do is rearrange your day based on your peaks of energy, your dips in energy, when you should be feeling groggy, when you should be going to sleep. And it really helps orient what you should do every day and when you should do it. And so it's both of those factors together that if you want to understand how at 1 o'clock today, Brad, you're going to be performing, what you need to know first is how much sleep debt do you have and where are you within your circadian rhythm? And just like how sleep need is genetically based, your circadian rhythm and how early or late those peaks and dips are shifted is also genetically based. And it's age based and light based and other things we can talk about too. But
so there's such a thing as a night owl. There's some people that report feeling wide awake every morning. And my mom, who's processing the show notes and the timestamps here, is, it can't stay in bed longer than 4:55 a.m. or some crazy thing where, I'm trying to wake up at a respectable time after I get my genetically optimal 9 hours. I'm thinking I'm one of those people out at the standard deviation. So there's that variation, and I know we have to couch this in all the disastrous modern lifestyle practices we practice, like looking at the screen after dark. And so I think a lot of the people reporting to be night owls are probably people that like looking at the screen and therefore suppressing melatonin while they're working through their Netflix queue.
Right. And so there are a couple things we can break down. So what exactly is a night owl versus a morning person? And I think most people listening to this are like, well, I don't know. Some people just like the mornings. Some people like the evenings. So there's actually a very strong biological way that you mark whether or not you are a late person or an early person. And it's quite simply, if I were to put you in a dim room, so very dim lighting, at what time would your brain start releasing melatonin? And the scientific term for this is called DLMO, the dim light melatonin onset. And so that time is the marker for your circadian rhythm. So for example, my DLMO might be at 9 o'clock and, at night, and Brad, yours might be at 3 a.m. And you can actually that can vary 8 hours between people. Oof. So it's very, very different. So when people say night owl or morning person, it's not a preference. It's a biological phenomenon that we don't have control. I mean, we actually can shift it, but it's not something that like someone chooses. And there are ways to become more of a morning person or become more of a night person. We can talk about that too, but it is largely biologically determined.
If we were to create ideal circumstances, like we went on a camping trip for 3 weeks without any artificial light, and then we're looking who's hanging out at the campfire as the hours of the night go by, and there's a couple people left at 3 a.m. and a few people ducked out at 8:45. But it's all going to happen after sunset, right? The DLMO doesn't happen at 3 p.m.
Correct.
We're looking at that range from extreme delayed circadian. Early. Right. And isn't teenagers, aren't they in that category of kind of like on this weird catch up where they're on a 25-hour circadian or something?
Yeah. So when you look at, you can sort of look at a couple different patterns and norms. So one is that on average, men are about an hour later than women are. Just on average. Again, every person's gonna be different, but that's on average. Just like height, men are a little bit taller on average. The other thing that we see is also that once you hit age 20, it's the latest your DILMA will ever be on average.
Oh.
Every year after that, it gets slightly earlier and earlier biologically.
Wow.
So there's actually, to your point around like sitting around the campfire, and some people are going to bed at 3 a.m. and some people are going to bed at 8:30. There's a famous question, which is, why is it that all the young kids are going to the discos till 3 or 4 a.m., 5 a.m.? Is it socially constructed because the discos are open, or is it biologically determined? And so this is called the disco hypothesis. And so some sleep anthropologists, I know I love the name of this, went around to all of these various different indigenous tribes around the world. And they actually put sleep trackers on them and they measured what time they're going to bed, what time they're waking up, what age they are. And what they found is that that pattern of, being young basically determined what time you went to bed. And they were actually able to measure the dilmo and see the difference in, being young versus old. And so the conclusion is that it's not, in these tribes, there are no discos. Like when you're in the middle of the Amazon, there's no like disco to go to. And yet your Dilmo is still later. And so the conclusion is that it's a biological thing that is related to age. And the prevailing hypothesis is that it makes sense if you have a community that you need to keep safe throughout the whole night. Well, you want some people, as the sort of elders are going to bed at 8 o'clock, you have the young people going to bed at 4:30 or 3:30. And while they're going to bed, the elders are starting to wake up. And so you have someone awake, some group of people awake at sort of all hours during the day to sort of keep the community safe. That's the sort of prevailing hypothesis, but as to why that might be the case, which I think is kind of a cool idea.
Very interesting. Wow. Yeah. So to optimize our sleep habits and our human performance, one, we want to avoid accumulating sleep debt. And if we do
Yep.
accumulate sleep debt, we want to catch up and keep this mental note in our heads. If you pull an all-nighter one night, that means you need to get an extra hour of sleep per night for a week to catch up.
Yep.
Can
Yep.
we jump the gun like my sister and do a 3-hour nap and just kind of have this rapid catch up rather than gradual if we really take care to have great sleep hygiene for 4 days in a row after a
Yeah.
disturbing jet trip or whatever it is?
So the short answer is yes, but it doesn't come without its consequences. And
Mm.
so one of the things we hear all the time is, okay, Jeff, I believe you about sleep debt. I believe you about the circadian rhythm, but honestly, I get 9 hours of sleep. I don't get a lot of sleep during the week, and then I catch up on Friday night, and I get 9 hours of sleep, and then the next day I just feel horrible. So I must not need that much sleep. That's what we hear. And so the question is, what's going on there? Why is it that you feel worse when you get more sleep? And so there's something that we've, and I think Matt Walker calls it this. So I don't know exactly what the source is of this hypothesis, but it's called a sleep hangover. And what's actually going on is that when you get less sleep than you need, your body is increasing its cortisol production,
Mm-hmm.
going into fight or flight. You're right, mobilizing tons of blood sugar. And so you almost feel this high. You're in a fight or flight response mode. When you get more sleep than you need, your cortisol production comes down. And so you're in a much more anabolic state and you feel a little bit more groggy. And that grogginess, is what people can say, oh yeah, I don't feel as good. But if you get more sleep for about one more day or two more days at max is what we've seen, that all goes away. So, and actually if you measure your objective performance is higher. So it's just this sort of state of maybe feeling foggy that some people don't like. But my advice would be keep going. You're on the right track. You just have to get through that, through that grogginess.
Well, I have to say, this is extremely important information for all of us to consider, and especially for athletes. When you have this prolonged overproduction of cortisol, you do feel fantastic for days or weeks on end. And I have these reference points when I was back training as a professional triathlete, and I would go strong for 6 weeks and wake up every single day feeling fantastic, rise and shine, don't even need an alarm, go out there and
Yeah.
train hard for hours and hours, come back, sleep well, wake up the next day, feel great. But I was on a prolonged stress high, and at some point you fall off a cliff because it's out of balance, it's beyond your physical capacities and your reasonability of what you can handle, but you're fooled by the cortisol shower that you're taking every day. And
Totally.
I would maybe call this like the Hawaii beach lounge chair phenomenon as well, because when we extricate ourselves from these high stress situations and we fly off to Hawaii for a vacation from whatever it is I'm talking about, my training, but people in a stressful job situation or whatever their normal hectic daily life is, then they're sleeping on the beach, they're taking these lazy 2-hour naps, they can hardly get up to go refresh their drink at the bar, and they're sleeping like crazy every night. And so you have to work through this and return to balance, and you feel like crap for I remember feeling like crap for weeks on end, coming
Wow.
off of a binge of extreme jet travel and racing. and it's really confusing. And I had to study and learn all about the adrenal glands and the stress response, because you just can't figure it out. It's like, wait, I felt great every day that I was out there cranking, and now I fell off a cliff and I feel like crap. But if you don't
Right.
write it out and come back to normal, yeah, you're in trouble. And I think sleep is just one factor in that whole equation of overproducing
100%.
cortisol.
Huh. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I mean, you've seen it and you felt it personally, kind of on a more extreme level in your training, and it's something that we see just all the time. Um, so it can be very tricky to know how you're actually doing, and don't be too quick to judge. And
Right.
I'd say the other very very common thing that I think is worth mentioning around just your own state is most people judge their prior night's sleep when they wake up. So they wake up and they're like, how do I feel? Oh, I'm groggy. Last night must have not been very good.
Mm.
But you actually need to wait about 90 minutes
Oh.
before you judge yourself. So that's another thing too, is don't take the state of how you're doing, but give yourself about 90 minutes before you do that. And that's because there's something called sleep inertia, where you're actually chemically groggy in the morning. You have a chemical called adenosine that's the neurotransmitter that is present in the morning that is slowly weaning off. And so there's a couple of ways you can beat that. One is coffee, which is,
Mm.
no surprise, coffee is so widely consumed, but coffee first thing can help mask it. So can getting outside, sunlight, and exercise. So that combination, I mean, I actually do that trifecta, which is coffee in the morning, which I love. Also, the half-life is, is short enough that it won't affect my sleep at night if I have coffee in the morning. And then I get out and do a run, as soon as I can to get morning sunlight, which the closeness of sunlight to when you wake up also is a very critical factor actually for that night's sleep. So anyway,
But
that's what I'd recommend.
with complete purity of let's say a health, a circadian experience, it's actually okay to feel groggy for the first 90 minutes, and
Yes.
it's not a critique. It's actually probably a marker of health.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think the other thing that's a little bit different when you talk about our modern lifestyle practices, it used to be that when the sun came up, you were getting full on sunlight. So, if you know what camping's like, you wake up as soon as the sun comes up. It's a very different wake up experience than now, where we're in our bedrooms. Many of us have blackout shades or eye masks. And so biologically, that was also not the norm. Light is the signal to start actually decreasing melatonin production, increasing serotonin production. And so, that's also something that's so different today when we wake up, that we just don't have the same access to light that we once did. And that I think is even exacerbating that sort of 90-minute grogginess when we wake.
So to optimize this, I guess we can try to expose ourselves to direct sunlight, especially the naked eye, the plain eyeballs out into the sun, not staring at the sun,
Yep.
people. I'm not talking about
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
getting yourself into physical movement and sun exposure will awaken you naturally. Um,
100%.
Otherwise, expect to be groggy, I guess.
Yeah, expect to be groggy. And so there's basically two ways you can beat the grogginess. One is reducing your sleep debt will always help.
Mm.
So if your sleep debt's low, because what will happen is your body will then wake yourself up naturally. You cannot physiologically oversleep.
Oh,
So
is that so?
yeah, so your body will wake you up naturally. So that's helpful. But if you have that, plus you're able to get natural light, not only does it help beat the grogginess, but the sunlight that you get in the morning is actually a signal. It's called a Zeitgeber, which is a German word for time giver. And it sets the circadian clock saying, hey, it's a new day.
Mm.
And actually that night, you'll have a much stronger release of melatonin, which is going to help you feel sleepier. You're going to stay asleep longer. You're going to have much more naturalistic sleep that you want anyway. So it's sort of a double win in that it beats the grogginess. You get exercise, which is also good, and it helps you at night.
The good night's sleep starts first thing in the morning with sun exposure.
Yes,
So there's no such thing as oversleeping.
correct.
And so what do you make of those research studies showing the people who get more sleep live a shorter lifespan? I'm
Yeah,
guess your response, but yeah.
yeah. So those studies are sort of backward looking in nature. So they are self-report, and they're backward looking. So really what just the way the study's done is, hey, we're going to survey a bunch of people. We're going to ask them how much they're sleeping. And then we're going to look at how long they've lived and what are their sort of health risk factors they had. And then we're going to run a bunch of stats on it. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. But what you see when you look at those studies is sort of U-shaped curve where, if you sleep, I think it's like, 7 to 8 hours, your life expectancy is maximized. If you get 8 to 9, your life expectancy decreases. And if you get 9 to 10, it decreases more. And if you're 10 plus, even just is like, just in the gutter. And so the issue with those studies is that what does that mean to sleep 10 hours a night on self-report? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, did that mean that you had a lot of sleep debt built up? So it's not actually clear what it is the study is even trying to answer. All we can conclude is that if you put that you sleep 10 hours or more per night on a study, that that's very highly correlated with living a less long life. That's really all we can conclude from that study because of the way that it's been done. So it's likely that the leading hypothesis is that the people that are likely to select that they were in bed 10 or more hours have other comorbidities and health issues where they're not actually sleeping 10 hours, but they're in bed all day. They're on various sorts of medicines that are keeping them in bed all day. They're lying in bed around all day. It doesn't actually have to do with how much physiological sleep they happen to be getting. And the people that are reporting 8 to 9 are the people that are likely, on average, to be healthier in other respects. So I would take those studies with a very, very huge grain of salt, just in the way that they're conducted.
Big giant deer, what do they call it? The deer lick, that giant block of salt you put in your yard so the deer can have, it's like a 10 pound,
an incredibly
10 pound
large
grain of salt.
Yeah, a 10-pound grain, look at it with a 10-pound grain of salt.
So I want to get to that, that genetic prescription for sleep and the standard deviation. And I'm curious, how would one know where they fall on that scale? And maybe even talk a moment about the outliers.
Yeah. So the best way to do it, not the easiest way, but the best way to figure out your biological sleep need is based on the observation that you cannot oversleep. And so what you do, and actually how they determine the sleep need information.
Jeff Kahn, speaking the truth, people. Come on now.
Yeah. And Brad, at the beginning of this, I told you everything I'd say should be able to be traced back to some peer-reviewed paper. So if there's any listener out there that's concerned that what I'm saying may not have scientific basis, we'd be happy to send out, the actual papers that what I'm saying is based on. And I might be getting some things wrong on the margin, but overall it should be in consensus agreement with what the sleep science community has to say, and is something that we hold ourselves to that standard, in everything we do.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned working with NBA and NFL players, and I have Tim DeFrancesco, former strength and conditioning coach for the Lakers, and he uttered a great soundbite on our interview, and he says, if you're in the NBA, you're asleep from 2 to 5 p.m.
Yes.
All of them.
Yeah.
And
the NBA it is absolutely, I won't tell you who, but very famous player. Everyone listening to this would know this person's name. And we were talking together about sleep, and he said, Jeff, now that we're talking about it, it's okay to talk about it, and the team's invested in it. He said, literally, I will tell you that I am on the floor at half court, and I am struggling to keep my eyes open. That's how tired I am. Can you imagine that, playing in front of, 50, 60,000 roaring fans in the middle of a game? You have all the adrenaline sort of masking the effects of fatigue, and you're so tired that you can barely keep your eyes awake in the middle of a game, of an NBA game. That's how tired some of these guys are. I mean, it's just
the travel schedule is ridiculous. Yeah.
Brutal.
And Tim was telling me, like, they, instead of staying in a hotel after an evening game on the East Coast, they will load up the private jet and fly across the country basically all night. And I'm like, why do they do that? And he said, well, if they stayed in the same city where they just played, the players are probably going to go out clubbing and not get any sleep anyway. So they just want to get home. And I'm like, oh man, that's brutal. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you're in a lifestyle of heavy debt, like my sister, like an emergency medical worker, first responder, whatever, you still have that potential to recover that debt in any way, shape, or
Exactly.
form. I'm guessing.
Exactly. You do.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
got, it
that's
can't
what's
be as
sort of,
good as
yeah.
sleeping straight up every night, but you're still making your best effort to grab those naps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, the downside is, if you think about every day as a performance event, some of them matter more or less than others, but,
Mm.
you're with your partners, you're with your, friends, you're with your family, you're, with your coworkers. So if you think about every day as sort of a performance event, what's going to affect that dominantly, I mean, there's lots of other factors, but the biggest factor that we know of scientifically is your sleep debt and your circadian rhythm. And so if those things are, so imagine you're building up high debt, that just means that most of the days that you're living, you're vastly underperforming your potential. And that's really the downside of living a high debt lifestyle. And then you pay it back, but then you're building it right back up again. And so you're living most of your life, not only vastly underperforming, but you're also incurring, and this is the part that's less known. And so again, I know Matt Walker talks very strongly about sleep is related to every chronic, 11 out of the 12 chronic diseases, whatever he happens to say on that. All of that is true, but we don't really know the exact amounts and quantities and how it all transpires. What we do know is when you build up sleep debt and you get less sleep than you need, your body goes into fight or flight mode, and doing that over an extended period of time, Brad, how bad and detrimental that is for long-term, health and longevity. So that's, I think what's going on there. So to answer your question about how do you know how much sleep you need, because you cannot oversleep, literally what you do is you go into a cool, dark, quiet room. You make sure that you have no sort of unnatural substances, plaguing your sleep. That would be things like THC or alcohol or a bunch of light exposure before bed. So you have cool, dark, quiet, naturalistic, sleep environment and sleep routine leading up to sleep. And then you just get as much sleep as you possibly can. And what you'll see is that most people get, maybe 9 or 10 hours the first night, and then a little less the next
Mm.
night, a little less the next night, and then it'll level off somewhere where their sleep need is. And where most people tend to level off is about 8 hours and 10 minutes of sleep, or 8 hours and 15 minutes of sleep, but again, with a 35-minute standard deviation. So that's how you actually know how much sleep you need. It is hard to do that. So actually, one of the things we've developed in our app is there's a bunch of algorithms that we can pull in all of your data and make a very good prediction as to what your biological sleep need actually is. And it uses all the data we had from pro athletes and a bunch of other cool stuff to kind of make that happen. But that's a little bit easier because then you don't have to do anything.
Right. It's going to be hard to discover that on your own unless you create those ideal circumstances for, let's say, a
Yes.
couple weeks on end.
Yep. Yep. And
Yeah.
really a week, if you create the circumstances for a week or you go to Hawaii
Mm.
for a week or whatever, you should be able to, but even then it can be difficult. So yeah.
So I want to ask you about the wimp factor. This is a
Okay.
personally motivated question, right? Since I had that privilege in my life to race on the pro circuit as an athlete, so that sleep was of the utmost priority. And during the 10 years of time I was out there training hard, I was asleep for half of that time. I slept for 10 hours every night and a 2-hour
Wow.
nap every afternoon. So maybe it's a two-part question. One of them is I'm speculating that you can make yourself require more sleep due to extreme physical effort out there every day. And then the other part is like, if I get used to prioritizing sleep to such an incredible extent that a wussy boy if I don't get perfect sleep, and maybe is there a psychological
Mm.
component where uh, now we're going to the constant commentary about rallying and sucking it up and toughing it up. Is there kind of a balance point there where some of that's relevant?
Yeah, no, the first question is a great one. And I think gets to a larger question about, sleep hygiene and all these ways to optimize your sleep, quote unquote. What you experience is you were training so intensely that your body actually required more sleep. And this is true for folks that are training really at that level. Most people, most athletes even aren't training at that level. I mean, it is, in terms of the amount of stress physiologically that you're putting on your body, it was incredibly high. And so in those circumstances, but I think what's exciting is not just in those circumstances from that, is that your brain is actually set up to optimize the sleep you are getting at night. So it will change how much deep sleep you're getting, how much REM sleep you're getting, how much stage 2 you're getting, all based on what you did that day. If you worked out super hard, it's going to prioritize one set of, one type of sleep. If you happen to get 3 hours last night, it's actually going to change when you're going to get REM and the percentage of REM that you're going to get that night. And so the brain is highly adaptive to what sort of sleep you need and already set up to optimize it. And so our view, and this is a view, I think Matt Walker's also put on this view, I think many others, is we need to get out of the way of our own biology. So don't try and, influence it with other things. Just, give it what it needs so that you can, have naturalistic sleep every night. Cool, dark, quiet, have a wind down routine. Those are that's the basics, and we can go, really specific. So that's on the first question of like, what, do you need, can you get to a point where you need more sleep? Yes. And I think the lesson for all of us is, while that's true for elite athletes, it's also true that your brain is self-optimizing, on a nightly basis what you need. The second question is like, how did you, especially in our work with pro athletes, this was a question because we were coming in there and sometimes we get laughed out of the room. The heads of performance knew that sleep was important, but how did we communicate this to players? And I remember having a conversation with one of the most famous NBA players of all time. And he said, Jeff, I'm getting like 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night. And, I'm fine. I'm busy. I got my own business. I'm a great NBA player. That's true. He is. And what I told him is I said, look, you're already good at basketball. But what I know is that you could be much better. And you're leaving a lot on the court right now if you got a little more sleep. And so that's the other sort of exciting thing is that, it's an opportunity to improve. I would say in terms of how we position, like, what does it mean? Let's say you have a huge event, you're playing the Super Bowl, and the night before you're up all night. And I think we've all had these nights where you're just up, you wake up at 4 a.m., you're wide awake, you've got a huge event the next day. Well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is how you perform tomorrow is going to be based on your sleep debt, not what you did the previous night. So if you, have been keeping track of your sleep and you've been being pretty disciplined about your sleep debt, one night of getting 3 hours. So let's say you build up 4 hours of sleep debt in a night. Well, if you've had 2 hours of sleep debt and you only have 6 hours, that's not that bad. Like you're doing actually pretty decent and you will be just fine. But the opposite's true, that if you have 20 hours or 15 hours and you're like, oh, I'm going to get 10 hours before the big game, it's also not going to help you much. So, that's the helpful part about sleep debt is it's not just last night. It's not just the night before. And it sort of allows you to give yourself a little bit of a breather to say, what actually matters tonight? Well, how much sleep debt do you have? Do you have 10 hours? If you have 10 hours, like maybe tonight, don't stay up watching, a bunch of Netflix. Maybe prioritize going to bed a little bit earlier. Oh, but I've got 2 hours and I want to go out for a friend's birthday and go out till 2 a.m. and tomorrow isn't so important. All right. I'm going to make an informed trade-off. So I think that's the power of sleep debt, is this metric where it kind of puts you back in control of how important is sleep that night based on what's going on in your life.
I love the reference to the top athlete who's already mastered their game. And so you aren't going to see this ridiculous drop off in performance, even though they're running on fumes all the time. And I would speculate that millions of people fall into this category where they are a successful startup entrepreneur who's taken the company public and they're grinding. And well, Elon Musk said it in public on Joe Rogan's show. He goes, if you're not working 100 hours a week, you're not going to change the world with great innovations and entrepreneurial skills. And he got widely criticized for that. Responsibly so. But in his case, he is at that level where he's doing these amazing things, and arguably his stat is probably somewhere close to accurate. But again, as you contend, maybe he'd have further breakthroughs if he prioritized sleep more.
Exactly. It's a question of like, it's just actually unmeasurable. He's making a claim that he hasn't tested. And so it's like, already, and he's so sleep deprived that it was sort of foolish for him to even make the statement, because he would have realized, oh yeah, what would it be like if I actually did it the other way? Let's say he slept, so Jeff Bezos is the other example, where Jeff, he won't take a meeting before 10 a.m. because he knows that
I didn't know that. So we have a counter example, people.
And he sleeps a lot. LeBron James sleeps a lot. Like most people, do really need a lot of sleep. I was actually pretty close with the head of performance of the Bulls, this guy Chip Schaefer, who's awesome,
Mm.
and he used to coach Michael Jordan. He's currently the head of performance of the Bulls. But he said to me, he said, Jeff, one of the things people don't realize, obviously Michael is incredible, but he said what they don't realize is that he was someone who I believe didn't have a very high sleep need. On top of that, he was incredibly gifted. He said, but everyone else on that team surrounding him took their sleep incredibly seriously. And so, he's also known for like not getting a lot of sleep and being out late and being Michael Jordan. And, it's just so, what you don't know is that how good could Michael Jordan have been had he got more sleep? And that's it's not like a conjecture. It's like scientifically, literally his reaction time would be 10% faster. Like,
Wow.
how amazing would he be then?
Yeah, and I mean, you could launch a counter argument, but we really should settle the matter by saying if Tiger Woods is also extremely low sleeper and he's known for being up late at night, and the tell-all biography that Hank Haney wrote that he's sending texts at 3 a.m. and then on the lesson tee at 6:45. But if one of those athletes was provided with an optimal sleep environment where they did the wind down routine and that they had dim lights around the home and they were
Yeah.
donning their UV blocking glasses,
Yeah.
arguably they would maybe creep up there into the 7 hour range right at the edge of the standard deviation or something, rather than
Yeah.
4 or 5.5 or 6 or pulling all nighters here and there. So boy, that's something for all of us to chew on, where we're getting through our day, we're doing fine, maybe we're successful, or we can report thumbs up all around, but dream of going from level 7 to level 9. That's a pretty big
Exactly.
time. And that's what the Rise
Exactly.
app is all about, that Jeff's going to tell you a little more. I appreciate your time so much, and oh my gosh, it's just we'll have to have a follow-up show after people have taken this advice to heart for a year. But talk a little bit about how we can get going with the Rise app and any way that we want to follow you guys or connect further.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure to get to have the conversation and share, what so many great and intelligent scientists have discovered before me. So, I'm just reporting what's been found. So the job has been a bit easier for me. So thank you, sleep science community, for that. But the Rise app talks a lot about and makes it really easy to weave in the things we talked about today just into your life. So we help you understand your sleep need. We help you understand your sleep debt. We help you understand and map out your energy schedule, your peaks and dips, when your melatonin window is. We'll help you set up your wind down routine. So all the things we just talked about, we help you put into practice to make really actionable. It's on the Play Store. It's in the App Store. You can type in Rise, and it's a purple R, so you can go in and check it out. We also sync with all the devices out there. So if you have Oura Ring, if you have 8 Sleep, whatever device you have, we'll also sync with. And if you don't have a device, that's okay. We'll also measure your sleep using a different technique. But what I would say to sort of close that up is that everything we talked about today, at least most of it, is available online that we published in our sleep guide. So if you want to go deeper, or you want to nerd out about it like we do and look at the peer-reviewed papers, if you go to risescience.com, we have a tab that says sleep guide, and you can click that. We're continually updating that with more of the science and trying to explain this stuff so that ultimately, you can put your time and your effort and your focus on the things that are actually going to move the needle for you. So that you can find online. We're also on Twitter, where as we publish stuff, you'll be able to see that there, and Instagram. So those are all the sorts of places that you can find us. And of course, if you want to start a trial, it's free, and we'd love to have you give it a shot.
Jeff Kahn from Rise Science, bringing the heat, man. What a fascinating show. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing feedback from the listeners. And I think everything we floated out there, you really came on strong with a really reasonable approach or suggestion, or, the science validating all these things that, we wonder about and are floating around. So thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks for
Yeah,
listening,
you got it.
everybody.
Thanks.
Ba-da-ba-ba.